Have you ever sat in a quiet room, no phone ringing, no footsteps down the hall, no voice calling your name, just you, the faint sound of your own breath, the slow ticking of the clock, and a kind of silence that feels heavier than sound itself? It's in that moment, not always spoken aloud, that a quiet question begins to rise from deep within. Am I truly alone, or have I simply never learned how to be with myself? As we grow older, life has a way of becoming still. The noise that once filled our days, the laughter of children, the clinking of dishes, the conversations at the dinner table, begins to fade. We wake up in the same house, sit in the same chair, drink the same tea, but something feels different now. Quieter, slower, sometimes emptier. And in that space, a kind of ache can grow, the ache we call loneliness. But the Dharma teaches something very different from the world. It teaches that stillness is not something to escape. It is something to enter. That silence is not a void, it is a door. That being alone is not the same as being unloved. It is, in fact, the beginning of something sacred, a return to what has always been with you, your breath, your awareness, your own deep, inner presence. The Buddha never promised we would not feel sorrow. He never told us that aging would be without loss. But he did offer us a path, a way to turn even the softest pain into the deepest peace. And that path begins right here, in this quiet moment, where there is no one else to distract you, no more roles to play, no more masks to wear, just the truth of your own being, sitting patiently, waiting to be seen. So I invite you, not as a teacher, not as a voice on a screen, but as a fellow traveler on this silent road, stay with me for just a little while longer. Not to be entertained, not to be told what to do, but to remember, to breathe, to come home to the self that has walked beside you all your life, yet has so often gone unnoticed. Because what if this part of life, this quiet part, this slower part, this more solitary part, is not the ending you feared, but the beginning you've been unknowingly preparing for all along? Part 1. The difference between being alone and being lonely. Being alone is not the same as being lonely. This truth may sound simple, yet it takes a lifetime for some to understand. As Ajahn Chah once said, being alone is a condition. Loneliness is a perception. You may sit in a quiet room and feel perfectly whole. Or you may stand among a crowd and feel invisible. Loneliness does not arise from the absence of others, that arises from disconnection with oneself. Many people fear solitude because they have never befriended their own company. They are always seeking something outside: noise, distraction, validation. But when life finally offers them silence, they mistake it for emptiness. You see, being alone is neutral. It is simply the physical state of not being surrounded by others. But loneliness is the suffering that comes when you reject the silence, when you resist the space where your own mind becomes audible. And yet, that same silence, if embraced, becomes the beginning of deep healing. There was once a woman named Eleanor, 72 years old. After her husband passed away, she found herself sitting in a quiet house for the first time in decades. The silence was not peaceful at first, it was painful. The absence of his voice, the stillness of the dinner table, the emptiness in the bed beside her. For weeks, she moved through her days like a shadow, unsure of who she was without someone to care for. But slowly, something began to change. She started writing. At first, just a few lines in a journal. Then pages. She wrote letters to her husband, to herself, to the life she never had time to reflect on. She began to meditate each morning, just 10 minutes of stillness with her breath. And what she found surprised her. It was not the world outside that was frightening, it was the parts of her own heart she had never met. In solitude, she began to listen, not just to the birdsong or the ticking of the clock, but to her own longings, regrets, joys, and fears. She began to discover a kind of companionship within a self that had waited patiently to be acknowledged all these years. Eleanor told me once, "I thought being alone would break me. But instead, it taught me who I really am." This is the subtle gift of solitude. When we stop chasing connection and instead cultivate presence, we discover a deeper connection, the one we have with our own nature. And from that rootedness, all other relationships can blossom anew, not from need, but from wholeness. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from clinging. And sometimes, we cling not only to people, but to the idea that our worth depends on being needed, loved, or accompanied. But your presence, dear friend, is already full. You are not lacking because you walk this chapter alone. You are simply returning to the center of your own being. So I invite you not to fear being alone, but to enter it gently, with breath, with mindfulness, with a sane reverence you would bring to a sacred temple. Because this space, this silence, is not empty, it is holy. And in time, you may come to realize you were never truly alone. You were simply learning to meet yourself. Part 2. Meditation and Mindfulness, the bridge between loneliness and peace. There is a saying in a Dhamma, "Return to the breath, and you are never lost." These words may appear simple, but they are a profound doorway into freedom. Loneliness thrives on disconnection. It grows in the space between our thoughts and our presence. It lives in the gap between what is and what we wished were different. But the practice of meditation, of simply sitting, breathing, and being, builds a bridge over that gap. It does not erase the pain, but it transforms how we relate to it. Meditation is not an escape. It is not a spiritual way of numbing ourselves, nor a method to avoid reality. On the contrary, it is the art of turning toward what is here, now. When you sit quietly with yourself, you are seeing, "I am willing to feel what is real. I am willing to listen." And in that willingness, something beautiful happens. I once met an old man named George in Arizona. He had retired years ago. His children lived far away. His wife had passed. The silence in his home was loud, almost unbearable. At first, he filled it with noise. The television stayed on from morning till night. His phone buzzed constantly with news updates, music, anything to drown out the ache. But then, by chance or perhaps grace, he attended a meditation group at the local library. They invited him to sit, to breathe, just for 10 minutes. That night, for the first time in years, George turned off the television. He sat by the window. He placed his hands on his knees, and he breathed. The next morning, he did it again. Then the next 15 minutes. Just sitting. Just being. No chanting. No incense. Just breath. Weeks passed. Something softened. The emptiness he once feared began to feel like space. Space to feel. Space to heal. He told me later, "I thought I needed sound to survive. But now, the silence feels like home." This is the gift of mindfulness. It brings us home to ourselves. You see, in Buddhist teachings, the breath is not just oxygen. It is the rope that ties the body to the mind. When you follow the breath, you gather the scattered pieces of yourself and bring them back into one place. This moment. And in this moment, you do not need anyone's approval. You do not need answers. You do not need to fill the air with talk. All you need is to be fully present. That alone is enough. The Buddha once said, in the seeing, there is only the seeing. In the hearing, only the hearing. In the breathing, only the breath. He was reminding us that peace does not come later. It comes now when we remove the extra layers of judgment, fear, and expectation. Many of us spend our lives running away from sadness, from aging, from solitude. But when you sit in meditation, you stop running. And in that stillness, you may hear something unexpected, not the voice of loneliness, but the whisper of your own sacredness. And slowly, the narrative changes. From I am alone, to I am with myself. From no one is here for me, to I am here for me. This is not philosophy. It is practice. Gentle, patient, daily practice. So if today you find yourself faking in solitude, I invite you. Sit. Breathe. Listen. Let each breath remind you that you are alive, that you are enough, and that peace, true, sustaining peace, does not come from others entering your silence. It comes from you no longer fearing it. Part 3. Deep connection. Not many, just the right one. As we walk into the later seasons of life, we begin to understand something that youth often overlooks. The heart is not nourished by quantity, but by quality. A full calendar means little if the soul feels unseen. 1,000 conversations can pass through us and leave no trace. But one true presence, just one, can light a lantern in the dark. When we are young, we chase connections like collecting seashells, many, colorful, scattered. But as age ripens our wisdom, we begin to see that what we truly need is not more, but deeper. We no longer ask, who is around me, but who is with me, fully, gently, without trying to fix me or fill the silence. The Buddha once said, a good friend is not merely a companion. They are a refuge. This teaching is not only spiritual, it is profoundly human. At this stage in life, we may find that the people we once relied on have moved away, or moved on. The family visits less often. The phone rings less. And in that softening of social noise, the soul asks the quieter question, who remains when everything else fades? I knew a woman named Margaret. Every Sunday afternoon for over 2 decades, she met her dearest friend Evelyn. They sat at the same table by the same window, shared a simple cup of tea, and let the afternoon drift by like a prayer. Sometimes they talked about the weather. Sometimes about memories. Sometimes they said nothing at all. And yet, it was enough. I once asked Margaret, what is it that brings you back to her week after week? She looked out the window and said, because when I'm with her, I don't have to try. I just am. That kind of connection does not need fixing or explaining. It doesn't wear a name tag or seek applause. It heals simply by being. In the teachings, we call this Kalyamidit, noble friendship. It is the type of bond that supports the inner path. It may not be loud or visible to others, but its roots run deep, and its blossoms are quiet joy and quiet strength. And yet, not everyone is blessed with such a friend late in life. That does not mean the door is closed. It means the invitation is inward. If no one sits with you right now, then sit with yourself, gently, kindly. Become your own companion first. Tend to your own silence the way you would tend to a friend's sorrow. Offer yourself tea. Speak to yourself without judgment. Smile without needing a reason. And when you do meet others, at the park, at the grocery store, on a walk, be the presence that listens, that notices, that does not rush to fill the air. As small kindness given with mindfulness can open the heart of another in ways no performance ever could. In this way, connection becomes less about having people and more about being present. You do not need many people. You need truth. You need kindness. You need one soul who can meet you where you are, even in silence. And if you have such a person, cherish them. If you don't, become that person for someone else. Sometimes, the best friendships begin not in shared history, but in shared stillness. Because when the noise of the world fades, and it always does, what remains is not who cheered the loudest, but who held your gaze when your heart was weary. You do not need the world to see you. You need just one being, human or divine, who meets you where words are no longer needed. And until they come, let that being be you. Part 4. Turning your home into a temple, alone, but not abandoned. There comes a time in life when the house grows quieter than it used to be. The hallway that once echoed with footsteps now only hears the wind outside. The dining table has more empty chairs than it once did. The television may still play in the background, but the laughter that once filled the air has faded into memory. And yet, within that silence, something sacred can be born, if you know how to listen. In Buddhist practice, a temple is not just a building of stone or wood. It is any space that invites awareness, reverence, and stillness. And so, your home, no matter how small, how simple, how quiet, can become a place of refuge. You do not need grand statues or incense smoke curling to the ceiling. You only need presence. Intention. A single candle lit with mindfulness can be more radiant than 1,000 lanterns lit in distraction. When we live alone, the world often sees it as emptiness. But the Dharma sees potential, a fertile field in which the seeds of wisdom can be planted. Without the noise of others, we finally have room to hear our own thoughts, to attend to the neglected corners of our inner life. And so, each morning becomes a ritual. Not of obligation, but of devotion to the simple act of being. I knew an old man, Larry, who once lived in his small house at the edge of the forest. His wife had passed many years ago. His children, busy with their own lives, visited only on holidays. Yet every morning, without fail, Larry would wake before sunrise, line a stick of incense, bow 3 times before his small Buddha statue in the corner of his living room, and sit silently for 10 minutes. There was no ceremony, no audience, just him and the morning light. I once asked him why he kept the practice after all these years. He looked at me with a softness that only age can grant and said, "Because when I bow, I remember that life is still sacred. Even if no one sees me but the birds." This is the power of creating sacred space. You begin to see that your own presence is enough to make a room holy. Washing the dishes becomes an act of care. Sweeping the floor becomes a meditation. Preparing a meal for one becomes a feast of attention. You no longer live alone, you live with awareness. And in truth, that is what the Buddha offered us, not a religion of crowds, but a path walked in mindfulness, step by step, often in silence. He taught under trees. He sat in caves. His greatest realizations came not in palaces but in stillness, alone with the breath. So let your home be your Bodhi tree. Let your breath be your mantra. Let the flicker of a candle remind you that light can come from within, even in the deepest night. You may not share this space with another person, but you share it with your own spirit. And if you treat that spirit with care, with the same tenderness you once gave to your children, your spouse, your friends, then you will begin to feel something beautiful blooming in the quiet. The loneliness fades. The room no longer feels empty. Because in every corner, you begin to see a reflection of your own sacred presence. This is not illusion. This is intimacy, the intimacy of living deeply, even when no one is watching. So do not underestimate the power of the space you live in. Turn it into a sanctuary. Not for anyone else, but for the soul who has walked with you since birth. The one who still waits patiently for your attention. The one who still bows before life with awe, even now. And in that humble temple, the temple of your home, your breath, your being, you may discover that being alone was never something to be feared, but a path to finally, gently, come home to yourself. Part 5. Facing memories. Letting go does not mean forgetting. There is a sorrow that visits us in old age which does not always arrive with tears, but with silence, the kind of silence that follows a name no longer spoken, a chair no longer used, a laugh no longer heard. It is the grief not of drama, but of absence. And for many, it sits quietly in the corner of the house, like a shadow that never fully leaves. This sorrow is the residue of love that has nowhere to go. And yet, in the teachings of the Buddha, we are not told to erase memory. We are shown how to hold it with wisdom. Letting go does not mean forgetting. The lotus does not forget the mud from which it came. In fact, it blooms because of it. And so too with our hearts. We do not need to banish our pain, our longing, or our memories. We simply need to stop clutching them so tightly that they suffocate the present. There was a woman I once knew. She had lost her husband 10 years earlier. He had been the only love of her life, the only person who ever truly knew how to make her tea exactly right. She kept his coat in the hallway, just as he left it. His shoes were still by the door. His books still untouched. "It comforts me," she said. But I saw in her eyes not comfort, but the quiet ache of unfinished mourning, the kind of sorrow that lingers when we are afraid that letting go means betrayal. One morning, after sitting in meditation, she did something small, but sacred. She folded his coat, gently, and placed it on the altar next to a single white flower. "I still miss him every day," she told me, "but I don't need to keep him in the hallway anymore. I carry him differently now." This is the turning point of the heart. When remembrance becomes reverence, not resistance. When we allow our grief to soften into gratitude. When we let the past be a teacher, not a prison. In Buddhist thought, all things arise and pass. Even the most precious ones. Even love. Even those we thought would never leave us. The Buddha did not promise that life would not change. He taught us how to meet that change with open hands. Sometimes we cling to memory because we are afraid of forgetting who we were. We think, if I stop grieving, do I stop loving? But love that is true does not need pain to prove it. It can be quiet. It can be soft. It can live in a smile when we look at the sky they used to love, or in a way we hum their favorite tune while making tea. And sometimes, we must also forgive, not just those who left, but ourselves. For not saying enough. For saying too much. For not knowing what we could only learn through loss. Forgiveness is also a way of letting go, not of the memory, but of the burden we wrapped around it. So if you sit today with memories that sting, let yourself cry. Let yourself remember. But then breathe and ask, can I honor the past without living inside it? Can I bow to what was and still walk forward with grace? In the stillness of a mindful life, we do not erase what came before us. We light incense to it. We whisper thank you. We fold the coat. We place the flower. And then, we live. Because the past, if carried with compassion, becomes not a weight, but a prayer. A prayer that says, you were here. You mattered. And I still walk, not in spite of you, but with you. Part 6. Living with meaning. When no one needs you, you must need yourself. There comes a moment, often quietly, when you realize that no one is waiting for you. The children are grown. The phone does not ring like it used to. The world no longer revolves around your schedule, your meals, your voice. And in that silence, a question rises from deep within. If no one needs me now, then why am I still here? This question is not bitter, it is sacred. Because from it arises one of the most important realizations of the spiritual path, that your value does not come from being needed by others. It comes from being deeply, compassionately present for your own being. The Buddha did not teach us how to be useful to society. He taught us how to wake up to the truth of suffering, to the nature of impermanence, and to the beauty of living fully, even in stillness. He never said, "Only the young and busy matter." He simply pointed to the lotus and said, "Even in the muddiest waters, something sacred grows." So what is meaning, when the world no longer places demands on you? Meaning is attention. Meaning is care. Meaning is doing something, not for recognition, but because your heart wants to give. There was an old man I once knew named Peter. He had no family left. His body was frail. He walked slowly, with a cane, always wearing the same brown coat. Every morning, he would bake a small loaf of bread, not for himself, but for his young neighbors who had just had their first child. He never knocked. He simply placed the bread on their porch and went on his way. I asked him once why he did it. He smiled, eyes twinkling, and said, "Because when I was young and struggling, someone left bread at my door. I never knew who. Now it's my turn." He wasn't needed. No one asked him. But he gave anyway. Not because he had to, but because giving had become who he was. That is the secret of meaning in old age. Not in grand roles or busy schedules, but in small, quiet acts of love. You water the plant even if no one visits. You write a letter even if no one replies. You hum a tune even if no one listens. Because in doing these things, you return to yourself, not as someone waiting to be needed, but as someone already whole. If no one asks for your help anymore, then help your own spirit. Sit with your breath. Bless your morning with a bowl of warm tea. Tend to your body not because it is young, but because it is yours. Smile at your reflection not because it is flawless, but because it has carried you through a lifetime. You are not useless just because the world has moved on. You are sacred simply because you are here. And sometimes, that is the highest practice, to remain kind, even when unseen. To offer love, even when unreturned. To live meaningfully, not because someone expects it, but because it's the most beautiful way to spend the time that remains. As the Buddha once said, if with a pure mind a person speaks or acts, happiness follows like a shadow that never leaves. Let your own actions, no matter how quiet, become that shadow of happiness. Not for others, for yourself. So if no one needs you right now, then make a vow, I will need myself. I will listen to myself. I will care for myself, not as a burden, but as a blessing I've waited my whole life to recognize. And when you live like that, you discover something beautiful. That even if no one knocks on your door again, even if the days stretch long and wordless, you are not waiting. You are not wasting. You are living, gently, meaningfully, completely, as one who has finally come home to their own heart. There is a kind of silence that does not come from the absence of sound, but from the presence of peace. It is the silence that arises when a heart no longer resists the shape of its own life. When you have lived long enough, seen enough, lost enough, and finally stopped asking the world to be different, that is when the real journey begins. Not the journey outward, but inward. Not a search, but a homecoming. You see, living alone in old age is not a punishment. It is not something to be ashamed of. It is not proof that you were forgotten. On the contrary, it may be the most sacred chapter of your life, the one in which you are no longer defined by what you do for others, but by how gently you learn to be with yourself. The world moves fast. People come and go. But beneath all that movement is something unshaken, the breath, the awareness, the quiet wisdom you've carried with you since the beginning. Now, finally, you have the space to return to it. You are not less because you are alone. You are not broken because the house is quiet. You are not unloved because the phone does not ring. In fact, this is the perfect moment to begin loving yourself in the way no one else ever could, without condition, without expectation, without end. Let your days be filled not with noise, but with meaning. Let your small rituals become sacred. Let each morning you wake be a blessing, not because of what it brings, but because you are here to greet it. And when the old memories come, let them. Smile at them. Bow to them. Then come back to your breath, to your tea, to your gentle walk in the sun. Because this, too, is life. Still blooming. Still sacred. As the Buddha once said, you yourself, as much as anyone in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Perhaps no one ever told you this. Perhaps it's time you told it to yourself. So let me say it for you now, softly, like a blessing across time. You are enough. Even now. Especially now. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are, a soul who has endured, learned, and arrived. This is not the end. This is the quiet beginning of a life lived inwardly. With wisdom, with grace, with peace. And in this peace, you may find what all the world could never give you, the sacred joy of simply being, and being deeply okay.